Well, I want to welcome everybody to our program tonight. I'm Greg Kimball. I'm the Director of Public Services and Outreach here at the Library of Virginia. And I'm really delighted to be partnering with the Jackson Project on this really wonderful year-long celebration of the 150th anniversary of Jackson Ward. I first met C. Shamoon in the reading room at the Library of Virginia. She started with a really simple question, like, who was Jackson? Who was Jackson Ward named after? That's actually been kind of a mystery to historians over the years. And she dug into that very deeply, I think probably has come to some pretty good conclusions on that. But like a lot of research projects, it started to really expand into some other really fascinating dimensions. And so they've explored, the sessions have explored the history of the war, the future of the war, and also who should be commemorated in public spaces has been a key part of that. And that's certainly an important part of the program that we're going to hear tonight. And I'm just looking forward to listening to our panelists and learning more about some of these key figures from Jackson Ward's history. So I'm going to now turn it over to C. Shamoon.
Well, thank you, Greg. It was a pleasure just to make your acquaintance about 6 to 8 months ago. I'm C. Shamoon. I am one half of the Jackson Project. Unfortunately, my other half, who is my big sister, Anjali Moon, she cannot join us because she is actually preparing for the Afrikana Independent Film Festival, which this is a precursor kickoff to. So if you all don't have plans this weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the city of Richmond will be highlighting Black narratives all weekend. So check out Afrikana Film Fest for more information. So, today is the final lecture of a 6-part series that we've been doing all summer in partnership with Library of Virginia, as well as Richmond Public Library. The first lecture really kicked off with who is Jackson, and it explored the research that me and my sister and Greg were all doing together to try to figure out who is the Jackson and Jackson Ward. Next, we followed up with a lecture on They Tried to Bury Us, where it was a metaphorical as well as literal discussion on Black burial grounds in the city. Then we had Walk the Ward, where we really talked about the intergenerational dynamics across the community, having people ranging from Magiel Walker's descendants all the way up to Janice Allen and Carmen Flowers. It was a really good discussion. Then we had a conversation about from gerrymandered to gentrified, and we talked about the origins of this space and the full arc of Jackson Ward through a policy lens. And then our last session was about the Virginia Way, and we had some key institutions across the state of Virginia come to the table about, what was the Virginia Way, and then what is their commitment to kind of redefining a more equitable and just way forward for Virginia. And so this is our final one, and it's called Arrested and Readied. And today we'll be, taking a deeper dive on the 15 honorary ancestors that will have street signs unveiled for them on October 2nd as part of the Second Street Festival, as well as highlighting any additional shoulders that deserve to be considered a part of the vanguard as well, because we understand that it's but so many streets in Jackson Ward, but many have left a legacy. I will tell you, it's surreal that we had this entire program planned in May, and we knew that the street signs would go up around October, but we never knew that signs for 15 notable Jackson Wardians would start to be installed the day after Robert E. Lee would come down. And so when we talk about Jackson being an ancestrally guided project, because we didn't set out to do this, as Greg said, I was just in the library one day trying to figure out who is Jackson and Jackson Ward. We think that the timing is divine in a lot of ways. And so I want to just, before I introduce the panel, I want to tell you who these 15 streets are named after, what their designation name will be, and where they'll be located. And starting on October 2nd, if you follow the jacksonproject.com, it'll be more information on how you can do socially distant, self-guided tours to really interact with each of the signs. So first we have Abraham Payton Skipwith. His street will be Abraham Skipwith Alley. It will be at the intersection of Judas Street and Lee Street. He is actually the anchoring ancestor of Jackson's research. He's the first Black homeowner within the ward. And so Jackson literally considers him the founding father of this space. Next, Bilbo Jangles Robinson Boulevard. That will be at Lee Street and Chamberlain Avenue. W.W. Brown Road will be at the intersection of Jackson Street and Chamberlain Avenue. John Jasper Way, this street will be elevated as part of the unveiling, but 6 Mount Zion is actually responsible for establishing this street designation, which is at the intersection of Duval Street and Chamberlain Avenue. Lily Estes Lane at the intersection of Charity Street and St. James Street. Charles Gipling Crossing, Charity Street, and at the intersection of Charity Street and St. James Street. Lucy Good Brooks Square at the intersection of Charity Street and St. John Street. And we'd also like to give a major shout out to Lucy Good Brooks and Friends Association for Children, because just like Jackson Ward was celebrating its 150th anniversary, so is Friends. They were founded in 1871. Neverett Eggleston Plaza at the intersection of 2nd Street and Lee Street. 80 Price Avenue at the intersection of 3rd Street and Lee Street. John Mitchell Manor at the intersection of 3rd Street and Lee Street. Giles B. Jackson Walk at the intersection of 3rd Street and Clay Street. Oliver Hill Drive, 3rd Street and Marshall Street. Lorna Pinckney Place at the intersection of 2nd Street and Marshall Street. Rosa Dixon Bowser Branch at the intersection of East Clay Street and West Clay Street. And last but not least, Maggie Walker Way, which will be a full stretch from Adams Street and Broad, starting at her statue at the plaza, going all the way to the end of Broad Street, where the Richmond Convention Center is. So really that full stretch of what we know as the historic Jackson Ward District. And so now it is with delight to mention who the panelists are and the moderator. I had a conversation recently with someone about shoulders, and they said, well, I don't like when people say shoulders because it makes me feel old. And I said, I don't know if shoulders means your age or it means when you come into the work. And when I look at the panelists and the moderator that we have today, we are standing on some significant shoulders that are willing tonight to give their energy and their expertise to this conversation. And first up, we have Brother Gary Flowers, who will be our moderator. He is a Richmond, Virginia native who graduated from the University of Virginia and read law at the Hill, Tucker and Marsh law firm. He has been executive director of the Old Dominion Bar Association, special assistant to Governor L. Douglas Wilder, public policy analyst and coordinator of electoral observers for the 1994 elections in South Africa, vice president of programs and national field director for the Reverend Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition, and executive director and CEO of the Black Leadership Forum in Washington. He returned to Richmond in 2014 and became host of the Gary Flowers Show. And he now lives in Jackson Ward, where he has become a community staple with Walk the Ward with Gary Flowers. Brother Flowers, Brew Dog Brew, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much.
Hi. Next up, we have Mr. Gina Rogers, who is a supervisory park ranger with the Maggie L. Walker National Historic Site, and she's been in this role since 2010. In this role, she manages day-to-day interpretive operations, program development, and community outreach. She has been a National Park Service interpreter since 1984, and during her career, she has worked at Blue Ridge Parkway, Booker T. Washington National Monument, Independence National Historical Park, and Valley Forge National Historical Park. She's been featured by Richmond Times-Dispatch, Richmond Free Press, C-SPAN, and most recently, she was featured on Time Magazine's Beyond Greenwood, the historic legacies and overlooked stories of America's Black Wall Streets. Come on, Mr. Gina. Thank you for being with us.
I didn't realize that, but thank you.
You like how I put some little spadazzle on y'all's bios. Okay, I did my research. Next up, we have Omilai Janine Bell. Beyond being my soror, she is founder and president of Alegba Folklore Society, which is a cultural center that makes an educational, social, and economic and spiritual impact. She created and produces the society's annual events, including Juneteenth, a freedom celebration, this past weekend's Down Home Family Reunion, a celebration of African American folk life, and the Capital City Kwanzaa Festival. The society also offers a menu of cultural historical tours and presents performances of African dance, music, theater. Soror Bell holds a degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and is a recipient of the university's Harvey E. Beach Outstanding Alumna Award, the Teresa Pollock Prize for Excellence in Arts, the Bell Women in Arts Award, the 2019 Richmond History Maker Award, and recognition as 2020 Person of the Year by Richmond Times-Dispatch. And when I say soror, she's a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And, I just want to give you your flowers, because We understand that Juneteenth became a national holiday this year. However, you've been holding space for that story well before it became popular. And so thank you. Just want to give you your flowers.
Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome. And last but not least, we have Mary Lauderdale from the Black History Museum. So Mary moved to Richmond, Virginia from Philly in 1995. She first learned about the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia through the news, and she went to become a volunteer. And 20 years later, here she is tonight offering her expertise as a critical worker at the Black History Museum. In this role, she's worked in the frontline staff. She's been a chief docent, visitor and volunteer services. She's been a gift shop manager, operations manager. And in her role at the museum, she actually became a founding member of the Sisters of YAM. Am I saying that right? Mm-hmm. All right. An African American Quilters Guild. It's a pleasure to have you. You know, Black History Museum is a staple in the community. And I think that if we could dedicate tonight to anybody, it would be to Adele Johnson. And so hopefully her spirit is with us as she too has joined the ancestors. And so Mary, it's a pleasure to have you. Tonight's about to be fantastic. Brother Flowers, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cisha Moon. And in her absence, your sister Anjali. Nature holds that everything comes when it's supposed to come. And the history of Jackson Ward has been suppressed by the Virginia Way. It has been obfuscated by the media. And in some ways, it has been ignored by those who should pay attention. And so here we are in 2021, which marks the 150th year of historic Jackson Ward. And by your work as a fastidious researcher and by your sister's work as a visionary, the two of you have been able to bring together and connect the dots on a lot of work that's been done before you. And that's when you talk about shoulders. And so we first pay homage to those who have come before us. For example, Mrs. Magdalena Walker, the word on the street was that she should have a statue in 1936, 2 years after her death. We didn't get the statue until 2017, but there were a lot of people who worked on that in between. And so we want to thank you for bringing the baton across at least the finish line of a new beginning. And the new beginning will be not only street names, but a new interpretation and a reinterpretation of history that's always been there. It's been the Virginia way that just hid it from everyone else. And so thank you for the work that you and your sister Anjali have done. So I'm glad to be here tonight. People ask me on the beginning of my tours, walking the ward with Gary Flowers, you know, what brought you here? And it is the transmutation of facts that otherwise were hidden. And so we always say you can't give off heat if you're not on fire. And so I'm on fire, and I'm glad to be with an esteemed panelist tonight. And I want to begin with looking, and I want to direct this to Sister Janine. When we look at the African origins of civilization and how Africans were brought to this place called North America, and later called Virginia, what were the predicates that you saw in coming to where we are today and recognizing Jackson Ward culturally and from really a pain and triumph of pain perspective?
Well, that's an interesting question, Gary, and thank you for asking it, because as I was thinking about tonight's program, really Jackson Ward as it existed in its heyday and the Jackson Ward that we are remembering and hopefully renewing is just exemplary, in my estimation, of so many aspects of the interdependence and self-determination that we see in African societies. It was, in Virginia's terms, segregated from the bigger culture, but it was insulated into itself And so people, it was the practice of what the Zulus call Ubuntu. I am because we are, and we are because I am. And so everything that happened inside the ward was facing inward towards each other. We talk in terms of the vanguard, we talk, of course, about the luminaries, but there were so many people who stood in rank, who knew their part, who, like my mother used to say to me, do your part and every bit of it, who practiced those roles that we see in African societies that are social, that are economic, that are business, that are family, and that are honorable, that sought the highest good. And so when you think now about Jackson Ward being recognized as Little Africa in the 1700s, and the kinds of excellence that was exhibited there, that is exhibited there even now by newer generations, I think it's a testament to our Africanness and the African presence in what became the capital of Virginia, and Virginia, of course, as the first recorded place of the African presence in America.
And as a segue, in many respects, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Commonwealth of the Confederacy, is ground zero to the American Empire, pretty much for all of the wrong reasons. The tyranny of wealth, the tyranny the tyranny of wealth, the idea that people's culture could be redirected toward a Eurocentric value base. The idea that names from Angola of the first 20 Africans would be changed to the name of the governor of the colony in 1619 by the last name of Tucker. And so in many respects, the Commonwealth of Virginia has led the way in what not to do in terms of honor, justice, and equity. And when you talk about values, let's segue to the values of Jackson Ward. I think no other person exemplifies the values of Jackson Ward than Mrs. Maggie Lena Walker. The idea of self-determination, entrepreneurship, race pride, the idea of dignity over dollars, but then using dollars to make sense for not only her family, but the community and the nation. The idea that there is a common connection between entrepreneurship and business development and political enfranchisement. The idea that when we fight together, we win. And so when I look at a Gina Rogers as the superintendent ranger of the Maggie Walker House, you've studied Mrs. Walker and her values. Please share with our listening and viewing audience tonight, what are those values and how did they help to form what we know as historic Jackson Ward?
Well, those values of Jackson Ward are pretty well captured in Maggie Walker's generation. And I will also say they were passed along from Maggie Walker to the next generation and picked up by the current people who are here in Jackson Ward. Because I would say that, the National Park Service being here for the last 40 years, we have learned and studied Maggie Walker's way, if considering the name of the street is coming up as Maggie Walker Way. It gives you the idea of how to pull together in the face of adversity. When your voice is squelched or silenced, you don't just cross your arms and say, there's nothing I can do about that. Maggie Walker's generation, that first generation coming out of slavery without having experienced slavery as a day-to-day existence, they were learning from those who came before them. and pulled it together to say, come in unity, come with the idea of how you're going to collectively uplift all, and make sure that you pass those values on to the next generation. So when I think about Maggie Walker being in the vanguard of Jackson Ward and the values of community uplift, I know that it can apply to those who are living there now. How do we bring these things together? Because the adversity, the obstacles didn't stop, and they won't stop. We have to use those tools and draw on it. And now the community is more diverse. The people who are living in Jackson Ward, it's not a predominantly Black neighborhood anymore. But does that mean that we just turn away from what it used to be? Or do we draw and learn from it? That's why this is important to look at the vanguard, so we can get and write down those lessons and pull together with the neighbors that are currently there now. It's a community, and that's what you learn from it. Those values can still be passed along.
When you talk about values transmuted to institutions, Mary Lauderdale, you represent the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia. And first and foremost, once again, our condolences and our memory go out to Sister Adele Johnson. May she rest in paradise and peace. But what is the role of institutions, albeit the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, or museums and other institutions around the state and around the country, in not only preserving, but enhancing what Jackson Ward stands for, not only for Richmond and Virginia, but the nation and the world?
So the most simple way to talk about the Black History Museum is to first, to condense our mission. Our mission is to preserve stories that inspire. And each of the stories that we tell about each of the individuals on this list and others are inspirations to everybody. The values, the idea of being artists and being entrepreneurs, bankers, business people, from hairdressers to barbers and the like. For us to tell those stories is paramount. Even the more modern day people that we are starting to tell the stories of, and going into the future, what we will talk about those folks that we have recently lost. And it doesn't matter how young, how old they were. Folks such as Adele Johnson, Lorna Pickney, Lily are just as important to talk about their stories as Lucy Good Brooks, as John Mitchell Jr., as Maggie Walker. And our role is to bring out more of those undertold stories to inspire.
Absolutely, and it's not lost to us that the building itself, the armory, the former Lee Street Armory, was constructed by Mrs. Walker's husband.
Armstead Walker, yes.
Armstead Walker. And those bricks not only give a physical foundation and give a visual symbol of an edifice that represents Jackson Ward, but it now houses the stories that will come forward on how we tell the story. And so I want to segue from there to when we commemorate names of streets. You know, some would say, why would you keep the green sign and not just replace it with another sign? What is the value of putting both together as we now start to rename streets and institutions within Jackson Ward for those who built it in a sense of collaboration, and not for those whose names represented the same thing that the Confederate statues represented? A reminder to not only Black men who had the franchise in 1870, at the founding in 1871 of Jackson Ward, named after a Confederate. So what is the power of names, Sister Janine?
Well, going back again to various African societies, names give us a blueprint for how we live life. Names give us a life path. So it's important to, Richmond is an interestingly historical place. And of course, quite a bit of the history that this conversation stems from is the history that's hidden in plain sight. So I think that it creates an interesting dichotomy for learning. And similarly on Monument Avenue, to be able to know what the namers thought was significant, and then to come back and say, but here's a whole truth of a whole people that was blindsided in that naming. The new names will illuminate lives and contributions and trials and tribulations that most people don't know. And I find that whatever ethnic group people come from, there's an aha moment that they can have about where they are. We get blindsided because we only know what's been taught in our schools. And we think that's the whole story. So it will raise, I think, curiosity. I mean, first of all, a lot of times people don't really think about, well, who was Lee? Well, who was Clay? Well, who was Marshall? Anyway, it's just where I gotta go. But now with the new names, maybe there can be some conversation that happens. That, as has been asserted earlier in this dialogue, can help to make Richmond a richer place. You said yourself, Gary, about how Virginia set forth the evolution of a nation. And so we all know that our elders have said folklorically, but also maybe metaphysically, that we got to go out the way we came in. And so if we can get some things repositioned and turned up the right way here in Richmond, which became the capital of it all, then maybe we can set forth a different way in the nation.
I think that's very well put. And just on one piece of what I said that Virginia was ground zero for the American empire. And if we were a nation, then we would be a nation of nationals. If Black people received their citizenship in 1868, we would be nationals and we would be part of the nation. But an empire goes out to conquer and to conquest and to rape, pillage, and plunder for the sake of the empire. And so even the language of how the nation was founded has to be reinterpreted. But I'll give credit once again to the Moon Sisters, because when Dr. Sisha first introduced it, she said, Brother Flowers, it's important that we, under the name of Duval, put Skipwith, because it begs the question, well, who was Duval?
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Yes, and then who then is Skipwith? Who was Lee, and then who is Mrs. Walker? And so with that, it is so important that we not only know the names, but know the context of the names. And I think that's important. And so,
because if I can say, Gary.
Yeah, I was going to come to you now, please.
Yeah, because when those names were put on by the people who named these streets, they were put on with a purpose.
Yes.
But as time progressed, those names lost the meaning. They became, just like you said, Janine, places, or Gary, places to how I'm going to get there, to Duval and Chamberlain, or Jackson and Calhoun, which end up being, say, Stonewall Jackson perhaps, and John C. Calhoun. But back in the time of the Confederacy, these were leading slavery proponents. But now it's just the intersection where the Calhoun Center is. And where you go to.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Please.
no, go right ahead.
Well, we got to get people to start thinking again, because we kind of get robotic sometimes and we don't really think about where we are, and we don't really think about who we are in the where we are and what our role is now and going forward.
Yeah.
Well, the great philosopher George Clinton said, "Free your mind, and the rest will follow."
You know the rest.
There we go. There we go. And so when we look at Sister Mary, once again, from an institutional standpoint, what are the plans of the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia going forward on how we enhance the knowledge of not only street names, but reinterpreting the misinterpretation of our beloved ward?
Wow. Wow. That's an interesting question. I almost feel sometimes that we're converting people, you know how they say, we save the world one cat at a time or something like that. People say things like that. I feel many times it's definitely an uphill battle. I think that the Black history in Virginia, in Richmond, and the Black History Museum are unfortunately well-kept secrets. As much as people know about us, there's so much more that has not been told. Jackson Ward is a unique story. It is a story that is something that should be broadcast around the world, first of all, in my opinion. And I think the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia is a place, a nucleus to start to spread that story. A place where people can come and learn, but also a safe space to talk about this history and to expand upon this history and to explain, or I won't say explain, people should know this, but understand that Black history is American history. It is not just for Black people. This country would not be what it is if it wasn't for the African American contribution to the story. I find it interesting that it's starting to change a little bit, but you know, growing up, we all read stories that might start out, the first books that we get might feature a child that is not African American, usually a young white child playing ball, having a game, it's going to school, has a dog or whatever. But if you just insert a Black face there, it's the same story. And I don't think people understand that the Black experience, life is life. Life is life. And we all share pain, hurt, hope. We are artistic. We are enterprising people, and Black History Museum is the place to tell more of these stories.
You know, as we go forward, looking at, I mean, the Moon Sisters have labeled it Unveiling a Vanguard. And a vanguard, of course, is a new way of thinking. There will be people and institutions who will say, well, yeah, I understand those are the 15 names you've chosen, but what about 16, 17, 37, 82? What are some of the names that you may want to put forward tonight, and this is open to the panel, that we may have left out, that should be included in at least the next round? And as you want to, please comment.
Well, I thought about a couple of people, and I have to say, looking at my co-panelists, I regret that the people I didn't think about were women. So Gina and Mary, we got to get that together, right?
Yes, we
But-
do.
But I did think about, of course, John Lankford, architect John Lankford. He was the first professionally licensed African-American architect in Virginia in 1922. Some of his buildings are in Jackson Ward right now. The mansion, the Taylor Mansion beside the Hippodrome Theater over there, and then also the Southern Aid Society building that was built in 1908. There are so many buildings that are in the permanent streetscape that were designed by Black people that we don't know. And so in terms of someone who collected some of these structures, Mr. Stallings.
Yes.
He had the foresight to do that. And that's a preservation, that's preservation. We don't, as African Americans, always think about preservation. It's kind of like how we don't always think about investment, but those kinds of things have to change. And maybe even the dichotomy of these street signs may lead to those kinds of deeper conversations. I think about Waverly Crawley, the mayor of 2nd Street. And then I think about sometimes the people who weren't necessarily the leaders and movers and shakers, but the people who supported those people.
Yes.
The shoe shiners, the shopkeepers, the resistors, who tailored and designed Maggie Walker's clothes. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yes.
There are all kinds of stories that are interwoven that create a whole.
If I may add, the unsung heroes and sheroes.
Correct. There you go.
And I may add to that, when we look at Dr. Zenobia Gilpin, people don't call her name as being a Black female physician in Jackson Ward, and Mr. Binga, for whom the Binga Center was named, are just a few. But and I'll throw this to Mary. I've suggested even before her death that we have a memorial walkway in front of the Black History Museum behind the goalpost in Abner Clay Park with paver bricks of individuals and institutions that helped to make Jackson Ward historic Jackson Ward. And there could be small benches like we have at the Mrs. Maggie Walker statue that have either reliefs on the side or at least quotes. When we talk about institutional knowledge of Jackson Ward, the wisdom, the collective wisdom that came out of Jackson Ward can be put forth in small benches. And the organizations, when we have the Renaissance roll call at the 2nd Street Festival, there were 122 organizations represented last year, who are descendants of the Tents and the Knights of Pythias and the Theban Beneficial Club and the Astoria Beneficial Club. And so if you would, Sister Mary, bring it to your leadership that we honor Adele Johnson by way of a memorial parkway or path that has paver bricks behind the goalpost in Abner Clay Park. What say ye?
I made a big note about that, but just to go back a second, the one thing I did want to say was, we were talking about who else we can name these streets after.
Yes.
I think that he placed us, persons such as what we are today, just to understand that each of these stories we tell, each of these streets that we name, for everyone we name, there's 20 other people that it could have been named after. And it's not always the famous or the names that everyone hears about, but this is to pique people's interest to learn more on their own, not just to you know, not just for these names, eventually become like the names that are up there now. Nobody knows why they're named after that. It's for us to keep these stories alive daily.
And I would want to add to that too, because it made me think who is doing this work now, and remember, and for us to remember how Jackson Ward was split into two.
Yeah.
So we're constantly talking about historic Jackson Ward, but when you think over to on the other side, where the St. Luke Hall is now and where Gilpin Court is now, there are people who are doing great things over there. So the documentary, Heard.
Yes.
I hope everyone has a chance to see that documentary, those who've come up in public housing and what they are doing to advance the communities there. And TJ Thompson, I would call his name out now, because he is doing what he can to uplift himself and those who are right around him. I would, we can't name, we have a limited number of streets, but an unlimited number of stories that we need to tell. So we and 150 years to cover with them. So let's start doing it. Let's start telling it. We're the vanguard, they're the vanguard. We got to push this forward and get the narrative out about what is happening now.
And looking at the chat room, I failed to mention Mrs. Ethel Bailey Furman.
I was trying to remember her name.
Yes. And the other heroes and sheroes, as we remember their names, we remember their contributions, and we teach succeeding generations in granite and in brick and in stone and in bronze. And that's what makes Mrs. Walker's statue at Adams and Broad Street so important. But as we go forward, we have to recommit. What are your thoughts about how we let me go back. One of the reasons that the Confederate statues became so prominent because of the fastidious work, albeit misguided and, immoral and ungodly and un-American, but the daughters and sons of the Confederacy helped to rewrite the history books, to give honor and prestige to traitors to the United States of America. That was the ugly. We have a chance now to interface with government at the local, county, and state level. What would your suggestions be on how we change the curriculum to better emphasize the values and the contributions and life and legacies of Jackson Ward and now historic Jackson Ward? And either one of you can answer. Well, I'll start.
I'll say, and then I'll let you finish.
Okay. There's just a pregnant pause there. I don't like dead air. Right.
No, because I was thinking about what we do here at the Maggie L. Walker National Historic Site, and that is part of it. And we're working within the standards of learning for Virginia to bring this part of these parts of the story out, to give teachers something to add to what the narrative is or what the curriculum is. I'm looking back at my education as when I was in 4th grade, we had that horrible Virginia history book. Yet my teachers took that, and Black and white teachers added to it and still gave us the proper things to learn, gave us the full story. And it comes down to institutions like us and the teachers and the parents to come together to tell all of this. And it also will help us build on so we have the core story of Jackson Ward, but Frederick Douglass Court grew out of Jackson Ward when people moved out, and Randolph, as people expanded into and out of Jackson Ward, these things were coming around the rest of the city of Richmond and going across the world and going across the country. So we can tell those stories and add to the curriculum that's currently there.
I agree. I agree with you, Gina. In some of the cultural history tours that we offer here at the Alegba Folklore Society, particularly in the beginning, Virginia,
I love that
along
one.
the trail of enslaved Africans. Sometimes we get large groups of college students who will come. And we think that it's important to start our story where it starts, as opposed to when we're on our knees in enslavement. So we talk about Africa's contributions to world development. And
Yes.
even the collegiates, sometimes they would call me a liar. That can't be true. All the greatness and grandeur that shaped the world that we talk about, that can't be true. You
'Cause it
must
wasn't
not have
written
it
in their
right. How
book.
can you know? Who told you those things? And I'm saying in education, the antithesis of the Daughters of the Confederacy's indoctrination is so that we as African descended people can see ourselves.
Yes.
How can we even fathom greatness if the only examples we see are outside of ourselves?
Yes.
We don't believe that we can rise above. It's like the conditioning of Pavlov's dog or the flea in the box or whatever. We don't descend any higher. But we are the creators and originators of the highest height.
And
we have to
that's
see
well
ourselves
said.
in the education process.
That said, let us go to the audience, the viewing audience and listening audience for questions. We just covered the one, we had a question that dealt with Frederick Douglass Court. And I must say, I'm a proud grandson of Frederick Douglass Court. My grandfather built my father's family's house in 1927, partly because of the largesse and the vision of Mrs. Maggie Walker and Judge Spotswood Robinson's father, who founded from the bank a realty company and established the first Black subdivision in Richmond. Let's go to Sister Annie. Several significant changes were legislated last year into K-12 history standards that have already been integrated into local school divisions. This year, there is a full high school course offered across the state for all history standards that are being reviewed. So we're making progress. Teacher training will also require African American history course of all educators. And I'm glad that you brought that up, Sister Annie. And I may add that I worked with Brother Derek Vance at Henrico High School. And he has a class entitled Classroom to Community. It's the first African American history course offered in Henrico schools as an elective. And he's now working with other history professors to make it more uniform. And this is part of what Sister Annie says. Anybody want to comment on Sister Annie's point? Brother Greg?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to integrate that. And I'll echo something that Mary said. This is American history. There's nothing wrong with having two tracks and having strictly an African American course, because many of these stories people simply don't know. But I think it's also important to recognize that African Americans are central to the American story. I think the 1619 Project really was about that. Placing them in a central role, not just as something peripheral to add on to American history. So both are needed. And I know there are teachers doing incredibly good work on this.
And can I chime in? First of all, fantastic conversation. I have a long list of things I want to say, so I'll try to keep it quick. Our last lecture featured Professor Is, who has the Real Richmond curriculum with Richmond Public Schools. So I just want to shout him out as well. A couple of things, when we think about Jackson and our decision, as those on the phone know, because we consulted with them first. I mean, you guys were the first people to even recognize that this was about to become a project. And the intersection of the street names was very intentional, because the truth is, me and Anjali didn't know who Lee was. We didn't know who Judah was. And so, not to say that the intention 10 or 15 years from now isn't to dismantle those names, but we almost do the concept of whiteness a favor when we erase it without educating ourselves first. And so we hope that this is at least the first step in helping people to recognize the true origins of this space, including us. We've been learning along with the community. But with that, I loved, Ms. Gina, you said there are a limited number of streets to tell unlimited amount of stories, because I think that was so brilliant, because not only do we need to capture individuals, but we need to capture ideas and institutions. So much came out of what is Jackson Ward. And so a couple of things, please visit our website. There is a link right now for Share More Shoulders, where you can provide your recommendations on how to honor all of those limitless individuals, institutions, and ideas through installation. But also, Jackson, we hope this is just the start. We did 15, but what this shows is that any of us can go to the city and say, hey, I want for this corridor to be named after this person because they had a significant value. And so we hope that if anything, people feel a sense of pride and ownership and agency to do their own mini Jacksons across the city. And I think that the last thing that I really want to say is, my father's August Moon. Some people who are from Richmond know who he is.
Right.
And my mom's family's from Bird Park. We were proud to be Black, and it was from a lens of education. While what I learned in school, I mean, I went to John B. Carey. I in hindsight, what did I expect to learn from a school that's named after a Confederate soldier? But my parents made sure that when I got home, they supplemented what was or was not taught in the classroom. And while we look at institutions like Alegba, like Walk the Ward, like Black History Museum, and like Maggie Walker House, who have been strategic partners for Jackson, we've also partnered with institutions that you wouldn't think, like Library of Virginia and Richmond Times-Dispatch. And so when I think about even the partnership with Greg and LVA, it's also important for these institutions to be diverse and inclusive and equitable, so that we can also come and learn our own truths in our own spare time outside of Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. And so if you are a part of an institution, I feel like everyone has a commitment to redefine a new way for Virginia and Richmond, because we really are ground zero for a lot of the Black American experience. And so thanks for letting me get on my soapbox. I'm done.
And I just wanted to say something too, renaming streets. I walked along just yesterday, walked along the Lee Street Viaduct, whatever you want to call it, the Lee Street Bridge. And the tiny little sign that it was renamed the Martin Luther King Bridge. Friday is 45 years since that was done. But how many people call it that? How many people think about what that bridge is? And I would just, we have to be stewards for renaming, when we rename these streets, to keep the stories alive, so that it doesn't just kind of like, revert back to, oh yeah, we just call it that because, whatever.
Oh no, walking the ward with Gary Flowers. We will walk past the streets. Don't you worry.
But Mary, I think that's a good point, because we also have to change our lexicon. I'm no longer making a right on Lee Street. I'm making a right on Bull Bojangles Boulevard.
That's right.
Like, it has become a part of our everyday.
Right, and for like Google Maps to recognize it. That's another thing.
So when I go to the Harlem of the North from the Harlem of the South, I just feel so proud seeing across the big intersections, Malcolm X Boulevard, or even some of the little signs, Wyatt T. Walker Way or Zora Neale Hurston Way, Adam Clayton Powell, just all the names. I'm not going to go down the list. But it gives me, in those spaces, a sense of belonging.
Yes.
A sense of my work is intertwined with this work, with your ancestral work, that somehow you've passed the baton on to me, and now I've taken it to do my work. And I think that that will be helpful here in Richmond as well, to say, I do matter. This work matters. Or as you mentioned, Gina, for the new neighbors in Jackson Ward, to really be clear about where you live. And how this area has shaped what Richmond and what Virginia is, and to also be a call to action for them.
Yeah, keep it going.
Absolutely. As we begin to close, I'm looking at Facebook, and some of the questions have been answered already, but one was where would visitors go to get the videos of previous lectures? And I think that's been answered. This is from Sister Christy. This is an incredible opportunity and so glad to support it. Thank you all. Great panel, great discussion. Congratulations to the Moon Sisters. You are incredible. I will agree. Thank you, thank you. And so that's Krista from the Maymont Foundation. And we're looking at the intersection with Sister Krista of those who labored in the Dooley Mansion, many of whom lived in Jackson Ward.
Yeah.
And so we are mapping now the house addresses, some of which were taken by the Interstate 95, but to the extent that we know where they were, let me say it this way, we are the consummate of all whose memory we cherish. And so whether it's a street name, or whether it's a brick in the road, or whether it is Google Maps, as we call their names, then we become part of them become part of us. And it lives. And so I'm so glad that we had this opportunity tonight to have the discussion. Dr. Sisha or Greg, do you have any further thoughts?
I just want to thank all the panelists. It's been a fantastic conversation, and the work is just ongoing, and there's so many other names we could add. I'll put a little plug in for the library and the Capitol. We've just getting ready to complete all of the biographies of the men who served in the General Assembly from Reconstruction to the around 1900, and there's a lot more than people think. There are just so many of these kinds of stories that need to get out there, and so our work is cut out for us. But everyone who's been on this panel has obviously contributed tremendously to that, and we just hope we can contribute to it as well here at the library. And please come and see us. We'd love to work with you as we've been working with the Moon Sisters.
For me, one, just thank you, everyone, just for believing in this work, being the shoulders that we've been standing on to even do this work. And I think, I guess a couple of plugs. I think the first is that, we wanted to have this, a lot of pomp and circumstance around the unveilings. But unfortunately, we really had to make the difficult decision that we just could not do that safely when thinking about the descendants, many of whom identifies at risk. So we've had to pivot it to virtual. So on October 2nd, you'll have more information by way of a video and instructions on how to engage with the street signs on your own. And hopefully when this pandemic passes, we can still revisit proper unveiling ceremony. But I hope that just on behalf of me and Anjali, we hope that the community understands that we just had to make a tough call on
But Dr. Sisha, if I may add from my beginning and opening statements, everything comes in due season. And perhaps it is the divine's idea that we don't have a lot of pomp and circumstance for the initial unveiling of the streets, but that when we approach it again, perhaps in April, for the Jackson Ward Day, we have more of a foundation upon which to build. And so don't consider it deficiency, it's just a redirection, but the street names will be there.
And see, come on, Brother Flowers, I like how you're thinking about this thing. Okay,
That's right.
It's sad, but today seeing the first of the signs go up was it felt empowering. So be on the lookout October 2nd. Also be on the lookout for us in Library of Virginia. And Maggie Walker House. We are taking a deeper dive on Abraham Payton Skipwith. As we said, he is the anchoring ancestor for Jackson's research. And we have some great things in the pipeline as it relates to him, because we want for Abraham Skipwith to be a known name, just like Maggie Walker, throughout the community and throughout the country. And does anybody else have any plugs before we say good night? Omilai Day, anything coming up at Legba Folklore that we should know about?
Well, yes, we offer monthly tours. I mentioned earlier in the beginning, Virginia along the trail of enslaved Africans, which is certainly a foundational step that leads us to Jackson Ward. And we do these for groups by reservation, but we also open it to the public once a month. And so Saturday, September 25th is the next time that you can join us. We'll start at noon here at the Elegba Folklore Society's Cultural Center. And you can visit our website and learn more. Or if you old school out there, you can just call us 644-3900, 804-644-3900.
All right, Maggie L. Walker House, what you all got?
All right, well, I just want to make sure everybody knows how to come and visit us. We're open Tuesday through Saturday, and we have, the house has reopened, but it's by reservation. And we take family, one group at a time for COVID safety protocols. And so either on the phone or on our website, sign up for one of those 4 tours that we have throughout. And we'll be having a presence on the corner of 2nd and, well, I'm still gonna say 2nd and Lee Street because Mrs. Walker said Lee Street during the 2nd Street Festival. So we'll be there and be happy to see anyone who is able to come out for that. So, yep, go to our website and find out the rest.
All right, Black History Museum and Cultural Center, Virginia.
So look for information on our newest exhibition coming up. It's titled Unsay Their Names, Stop the Pain. And it's an exhibition of photographs of and quilts of events that have happened in the past year and a half pertaining to COVID, the statues, Black Lives Matter, and it's going to be a fantastic exhibition. I also want to say we are doing a joint exhibition with the Holocaust Museum and the History and Culture Museum that is up through October 24th. And that is titled Violins of Hope. And ours features 5 violins from Holocaust victims. And this is showing solidarity, race, creed, color. Music is important to everyone. Hope and pain transcends race. And so it was a great exhibition, very moving. And I also want to say, I have my Lucy Good Brooks bracelet. I wore it tonight. I wear it every single day. She says, isn't it amazing what one woman can do with the help of her friends? And I say, isn't it amazing what we can do with the help of our friends? And everybody here is friends, and we just have to keep moving forward.
Yes, ma'am. And Gary Flowers, how can people hear you, walk with you, and all that good stuff?
Well, by day, you may hear me or view me on the Gary Flowers Show, which is rejoicerichmond.com. But you may walk with me on Mondays, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and book your tours through walkingtheward.com. But more than that, on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, I'm working with Tiger Tom Mitchell's great nephew, Kerry Mitchell, and he has brought together a great vision to celebrate and to consecrate the life and legacy of the Armstrong Walker Classic by way of a parade that will trans the historic Jackson Ward from essentially the Coliseum, 5th and Lee, to the Maggie Walker High School. And so it's a way that you don't have to be a graduate of Armstrong or Walker High School. It's a way that we can talk about the values of the game and institutional memory. And so we look forward to you joining us the Saturday after Thanksgiving. You'll hear more in the coming weeks.
Greg, final thing to you. For Library of Virginia, all summer to share your platform to elevate.
Yeah, so of course we are dedicated to the history of Virginia writ large, and we have a great exhibit right now on Columbia Pike, which is probably the most diverse several miles in the United States. There are over 100 different cultures represented there. This was a photography project that documented the various festivals and other things that happened along the Pike. I think it's a great exhibit. We'd love to have you come see it. And just as you have, Sisha, we just encourage people to come and do research with us. We are going to be reopening some Saturday hours, so check the library's website. Because of COVID, we had a more limited schedule, but we want to reopen that so that we can get more people who may not be able to attend during the week to come in. And, I think sometimes people get intimidated by coming into an archives, and I can understand that. But we can train you up and get you into the original material and the real stuff. You'll learn the real history of Virginia by reading the original documents. I've always said that.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Everybody take care, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you online on October 2nd, okay?
Right. Good evening. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.